Hello, and welcome to a new episode of the Philosopher's Rant. Um, this, I did not want this to be the first episode since coming back, and there's a lot of reasons for the break that I went on over the last 7 months or so. Um, but a week from last Tuesday, Neil Peart passed away, and he was my childhood hero. He was one of the few people that I really looked up to growing up, as a drummer and just as a person in general. Um, I found out when I was at the grocery store and I was paying for my food, and my mom called and said, "Did you hear about Neil Peart?" And I'm like, "No, what's going on?" She said, "Well, he died." And because there was a line, I was paying for food. I wasn't sure if what the information that mom was telling me was accurate. Could be an internet rumor or what have you, because it was so sudden. I I couldn't even process it at the time. So I went home. I confirmed it through NBC News, and I've been wrestling with that honestly, since it happened, for well over a week now. And a short disclaimer: I have pronounced Neil Peart's name as Pert my whole life. The first time that I heard that it should be pronounced Peart was word of mouth, so I didn't necessarily believe it. Then it was confirmed by Peart himself. So if Pert comes out, I apologize. It's just the way that I've pronounced it my whole life. Um, I I first heard Neil Peart, um, from a family friend of ours who, he had a drum kit. He was the person that got me into drumming. And one of the ways that he did it was he lent me a VHS copy of Work in Progress. And that was my drumming Bible. It was my music Bible. I have watched that thing so many times. I still have the tape. I'm surprised it still works. um, because I'm surprised I haven't worn it out yet. But his he was just such an impressive person, on that video. He was incredibly articulate, highly philosophical. He You could tell that there was a huge intellect behind the person. Not to mention, his physical ability and technical ability behind the drum kit. And Test for Echo isn't even one of their best albums. Geddy Lee actually said that creatively, by the time they got the Test for Echo, they were probably a little burnt out. Um, and but I watched that thing so many times, and so many things about it influenced me. The moniker "Keep It Simple, Stupid." I've personally never agreed with, and he replaced it with music, make up something interesting and complimentary. And I've always felt that way, about everything. He introduced me to the philosopher Seneca, actually, when talking about virtuosity on the video. He talks about innovation breeding necessity, and that comes from Seneca. The idea of, I'm sure Neil wasn't the one that came up with this, but he said, the hardest thing for a writer's wife to learn is that when he's staring out the window, he's working. And the same is true not just for drumming or artistic purposes, but for philosophy as well. Any kind of writing. When I'm watching TV, I'm still actually working, because I'm thinking things through in my head. And like I said, it just watching him on that on Work in Progress inspired me to become a drummer, um, because there are very few people who really showed you what drumming could actually be like. Most people they treat drumming or the drummer as a timekeeper, and that's all they are. They're a living, breathing metronome for the rest of the band, and I hate that. Drumming can be so much more, and there are many other examples of people who showed that. You know, Gene Krupa, Buddy Rich, um, Carter Beauford, Max Roach, and Keith Moon, John Bonham, who is the other huge influence musically on my life. So, you know, his influence cannot be overstated to a point that my mom said, "Wow, it feels like a member of the family died," which in many respects is true. Um, and you know, after that, I got my first drum kit when I was around 15. It was a Dixon kit. Not very good, but it was a four-piece, and it was a way to start out. But the overall goal was always to get Neil Peart's setup on some level, because it goes back to the less is more idea. There's huge debate over how much you actually need in order to play drums. You don't need, 50 bazillion drums like Neil Peart has, and yada yada yada. And I don't care. It goes back to what you want to be able to do, and for me, because of my friend's drum kit, which had 4 rack toms, and Neil Peart's drum kit, which eventually came down to 4 rack toms in his live kit. To me, 4 rack, three floor on the right side, another floor on the left just makes sense, which gets to another aspect of Neil Peart for me, and that is his drum kit. The way that he set it up was so logical. It just made sense in the way the body functions and where your hands are going to move. And it was aesthetically just beautiful. It was a beautiful setup. And I mean, this was even in the when he had the red Sparkle kit originally from DW. And then he got more and more elaborate as after Vapor Trails. And his electronic setup too. He's the only drummer that has ever played electronics in a way that, to me, that doesn't really feel like cheating. There's very few drummers that have done that. But I love the way that he integrated electric drums into his playing, not just from an artistic point of view, but also to be able to recreate the parts that they created in the studio. And then there's his lyrics and writing ability. A lot of people, Rush is one of those bands, as someone said, you either get them or you don't. And same with the lyrics. You either get it or you don't. A lot of people hate his lyrics. I myself loved them. My favorite line that he probably ever wrote is still out of 2112, which is another toy that helped destroy the outer race of man. Forget about your silly whim, it doesn't fit the plan. And there's so many more, but the inspiration that his lyrics had, the worlds that they took you to, the way that they made you think about certain things, is an influence that I can't even articulate in many respects on the way that I think as a human being. And I'm not even a person that subscribes to Ayn Rand's objectivism or libertarianism, which was embedded in his lyrics. But and then there's his live performances and the energy that brought. The fact that the band and he worked so hard to recreate the studio performances, which I loved. A friend of mine hated it. He's very much an improv guy, and I can't stand improv. I want the live version to be exactly or near exact to the studio, which is interesting with Zeppelin because they never played it according to the studio live. But I remember, when I saw Rush for the first time, and how amazing it was. I was only able to see them twice, even though they were my favorite band. I wish to God I would have been able to see them on R40. But I wasn't able to. And then, we get this news that that they kept to themselves for a long time, and I completely understand. I'm not begrudging them that in any way, shape, or form. A person deserves their privacy. But I am just horribly, horribly sad. And the music world and the world in general has just lost a giant that is never going to be replaced. There will be many imitations, but never the original article in any way, shape, or form. I mean, to a point that I'm also a fan of Mike Portnoy, and one of the issues that I have with Portnoy's playing is, it's great, but I can hear the math in his subdivisions when he does fills and things. I don't hear that in Neil Peart. He hides it very well. I don't hear dice rolling in my head when he goes down the toms. And that's another thing with Neil that's amazing. Kind of like the same thing that he had with Keith Moon. He tried to mimic Keith Moon's playing and couldn't do it, and then came up with his own style. And a lot of people have tried to imitate Neil Peart and aren't able to do it. And the reason is because he had a way of articulating things, of putting things together, of hiding the meter that other people just aren't able to do. They're not able to put a drum part together the way that Neil did. And there are even drummers who now are more technical players. They have more technique than Neil Peart did. And yet they're still not able to play as well as he does because the parts they put together aren't as complementary to the music as Neil's was, which gets to the final thing I think I'll talk about in this video specifically, and that is Rush is one of the few bands who had drum parts that I wouldn't change. There are a lot of drum parts that I've heard throughout the years that I'm like, oh, well, I could easily make this better, more interesting. And there are people that are going to disagree on that because they take the less is more approach, which I don't. Neil actually says in Taking Center Stage, that more is better, and I agree. Um, but Rush's parts, they've always made intrinsic sense to me. What he does feels logical, and it shouldn't be changed. And that gets really interesting because um, if you take Limelight, for example, towards the end of the song, and the live version, starting on different stages, you have downward four-stroke roughs going from the snare side, the floor tom, to the bass, and they're not in the original version, and yet it makes sense that they're there. And when I listen to the original song on Moving Pictures, I mentally put them in. It feels like something's missing at that point. So, yeah, my idolation, as much to Neil Peart's potential chagrin, can't really get any higher. He was a phenomenal influence. He was a phenomenal human being, and he is going to be missed by myself and the rest of the world. Thank you very much for letting me get some of this off my chest. And as far as the Philosopher's Rant is concerned, I am going to be returning momentarily. I'm hoping to get a video up by early next week to deal with some of the political issues that have been going on. I've also been I am going to continue the conversation or discussion about democracy. I just haven't figured out exactly how I'm going to do the next video yet. And I will also explain why I took such a long hiatus. It just wasn't appropriate for this video. Anyway, thank you very much, and I hope you all have a nice day.